Hello, Jinjos! Welcome to episode of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. This week we're covering Banjo-Tooie! And 100% of the credit for the camera goes to banjosbackpack.com. They provided all the tools I needed to do this episode, so if you have anybody to thank them. And with that said, let's get going. So the intro to this game is absolutely insane. There is a ton of stuff to look at here. And by a ton, I mean like a handful of stuff, which is just not what I'm used to on this show. So let's take a look. The first thing that couldn't even be explained by Banjo's Backpack themselves is that apparently there's a second Klungo at the very start of the opening cutscene. While the Klungo that you guys get to see is the one that's pushing the boulder that's on top of Gruntilda, this one over here is pitch black and started off on a T-pose and then started moving towards the area with the boulder. If I had to guess, which doesn't mean that makes me correct about this, I'm gonna swing a guess that this is supposed to be Klungo walking towards the boulder and the developers chose not to finish this scene and use it in the game. Still in the opening cutscene here at Banjo's house with Banjo, Bottles, and Mumbo Jumbo. You can actually see when you zoom the camera out that there are two Banjo houses in this cutscene. One is meant for the regular scenes and the other one's meant for the first person scene when Banjo's looking at his cards. But one of the most unusual things here that can't really be explained by me or Banjo's Backpack is that there's three gray cubes that hang inside of the first person area. Now I know not all of you, but many of you are in the comment section right now trying to tell me what this is supposed to be, probably at the ready to tell me it's something about the camera controls. But don't be so sure, B. What I'll do just to be sure is I'll contact Playtonic Games themselves and see if they want to answer the question. If they do, I'll end up pinning the response on my Twitter. Here in the opening cutscene, we got another cool effect. We have the lightning strikes from outside the window. Now, when you're playing the game, all you see is just a flash of white. But outside of the boundaries, we can actually see that it's just a white texture that blips on the screen to represent lightning strikes. Over here we got Mumbo Jumbo checking out Gruntilda's sisters, and while he's spying on these two lifting up the boulder to bring back Gruntilda after 2 years, all along, right to Mumbo Jumbo's left, was Gruntilda herself in a T-pose, and right next to her is her eyeball that gets used in the cutscene. Speaking of that cutscene, if we look at this scene from a different angle, you can see that Gruntilda actually comes out of the hole twice, though the second time around it's off screen. So a lot like how it was in my Banjo-Kazooie episode where Kazooie was always present inside of Banjo's backpack whenever it was at the file select screen. Here in this in-game cutscene, Kazooie is also in Banjo's backpack the whole time. However, once again, just like in the original Banjo-Kazooie, once you look inside the backpack during gameplay, Kazooie is nowhere to be found. She'll only spring up when she's needed. Alright, now that we're finally done with the opening cutscene, I figure we can actually do the file select screen here. I think it's really interesting. One of the things that you notice right off the bat, on the left wall there is a picture of Banjo-Tooie, which by normal means you actually can't see. Also, if you pay attention to the N64 console on the table, you'll notice that the controller wires aren't connected to anything. I mean, why render a Nintendo 64 controller when no one's gonna see it? And you may also notice that there's no fourth wall here. I guess Banjo and Kazooie just broke it so many times it's just non-existent at this point. But one last thing to notice here is that every single cartridge on this table doesn't have its own unique back end. Funny enough, inside the game of Banjo-Tooie, there are Nintendo 64 cartridges that do have its own unique back, but for these prop cartridges, they just have a front label on both sides. You know something we haven't even done yet? We haven't done a zoom out. Because this camera is so awesome, it's much different than it was in the Banjo-Kazooie episode. The zoom outs for Banjo-Tooie look fantastic. Every single bit of geometry that is the map shows up in one shot. And so we can finally get a really good look at Spiral Mountain from way up above. So inside the Jiggy Temple, there are two things we want to look at here, and you can probably guess what one of those things are, but we'll get to that in 1 second. The first thing I wanted to show off is that when we zoom this room out, we can actually see that it's in the shape of a Jiggy. Now, you could have just figured that out by just looking at the building and looking at the interior. But let's be honest, it's a little more satisfying and a little more on the nose if we actually zoom the camera out from up above to see the outline of the Jiggy. And of course, if you take the camera outside the temple, you can actually see that there's an outline of a Jiggy as well. And you might have noticed that there's actually a skylight in the shape of a Jiggy, but you can never get Banjo and Kazooie up there. Once again, thanks to Banjo's backpack, we actually have a no-clip code that allows us to take Banjo and Kazooie anywhere we want. So if we take Banjo up there, we can actually see that Banjo actually stand on the hole. And because he was never supposed to be here, the camera doesn't know what to do, so it just spins around this hole, trying to get a good look at Banjo and Kazooie, but it can't. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you is the fact that there's a huge reflection on the floor of the temple. This reflection technique, as far as I can tell, is only used twice in the entire game. Once here, and another time at Grunty Industries. But again, because we have this no-clip code, we can actually see what happens when we take Banjo through the floor, doing a complete mirror of Banjo's world. And as you can see, when you take him down below, the reflection Banjo actually goes out into the real world. Now, inside the Mumbo Hut at Jolly Roger Bay, there's actually an alternative path that will lead you to a different portion of Jolly Roger Bay. This is the only hut of Mumbo Jumbos that will actually take you in a different path. Well, outside of Hailfire Peak as well. However, every single Mumbo Jumbo hut in the game all have this alternative door. Now, the thing is, that door doesn't lead anywhere. Unfortunately, if we were to use the no-clip code to get through the wall and go through this path, the doorway on every single other Mumbo Jumbo hut just acts as a wall. You know what? Since we talked about Jolly Roger Bay, why don't we do a zoom out of that as well? Definitely one of my personal favorites. I'm gonna have to ask you stop dancing. It's very distracting. Anyways, why are we in Billy and Bill and Delberta's home? Funny enough, the reason for this is because an object inside their home has unused geometry in it. The stove that is in this house is very unique compared to every other object that's in the game, because most of the objects that you pass the camera through prove to show that there's nothing inside. However, if we take the camera inside of this stove, you can actually see that the hatch was supposed to open at some point.
The hatches are open.
However, this never happens in the game. So since we're in Glittered Gulch Mine, I figured we could take care of a few things, one of which, of course, is what does it look like when the Billy Bob is underground? And unfortunately, the Billy Bobs just straight up disappear when they go underground. And I can actually pause just before they're about to disappear, get up nice and close, and unfreeze the enemy at just the right moment when it's going to have its value set to 0. People who watched my ukulele episode might get a little bit of deja vu here. Right now we're looking at this grinder machine that has a conveyor belt going around, and what's really interesting here is that if we take the camera outside of the boundaries, we can see that each plate of the conveyor belt is its own separate entity, and when it reaches the end of the cycle, it very quickly rushes to the back of the line. This is so the device can use far less polygons than if it was an actual full belt. Here's a zoom out of one of the first-person shooter segments of the game, and once again this was made possible by Authentic from banjosbackpack.com. Normally, if we took the camera outside of any of these rooms in these first-person areas, the developers normally have very specific culling that if the character is not in that room, you're not supposed to see it. But because Authentic came up with a code that disabled the culling here, we got ourselves a pretty sweet zoom out. Hey, remember Gruntilda's Lair from Banjo-Kazooie 1? That's a silly question. Of course you don't forget. Unless you've never played these games before. Which, if that's the case, thank you so much for watching. But yeah, in Banjo-Tooie, they actually bring back Gruntilda's Lair to an extent. They block off all the entrances with stones. But if we take Banjo through the stone, we can actually see that there's still remnants of the hallways that lead into the lair. Now, unfortunately, trying to trek on these paths is even more dangerous than it was in Mumbo's hut. If you walk too far into these hallways, man, you're gonna fall through. Here's another quick zoom out of one of the first person areas. This time it's in my Ahem Temple, and we get to do this without the Breegull in the way. You might have noticed in the last one that Kazooie was kind of in the front of the screen the entire time. Well, we managed to avoid that by just activating the camera before it goes from third person to first person. Really quick, people just wanted to know what Jam Jar looks like when he goes in and out of his stations. And of course, we gotta do a nice zoom out of my Ahem Temple, which, considering how much land you had to track with all these maps, it's really impressive what they were able to pull off with the Nintendo 64's hardware. Hey, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Quick little news update for you. We got Sonic Heroes coming out next week, and then the week after that, we're going to be doing Batman Arkham City. A lot of people keep asking about Arkham City. I hear you guys. Those of you who support me on Patreon, I got some good news for you. I'm going to be doing a real talk this week, so expect some leftover footage from past episodes and some more insight on me as a YouTuber. And just one more reminder, we got the playlist in the video description down below, or on the end cards here if your platform supports it. Be sure to give it a click and see if there's any episodes you might have missed. I've done all sorts of N64 games like Banjo-Kazooie, Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and GoldenEye. So, enjoy. But alright guys, I'm gonna get going. Take care of yourselves. See you next week.